All right, Nigerians, something very important is about to happen in Abuja. And if the opposition parties are genuinely serious about 2027, this meeting could become one of the most consequential political gatherings before the presidential election. On Monday, August 31st, Atiku Abubakar, Peter Obi, and leaders of 6 opposition political parties are expected at the Yar'Adua Centre in Abuja for the first summit organized by the G-100. And I want us to understand exactly what this meeting is about, because this is bigger than Atiku meeting Obi, taking photographs, shaking hands, and everybody going home. The theme is a framework for opposition cooperation and coordination. The 6 parties involved are the ADC, APM, NDC, PDP, PRP, and SDP. The national chairman, national working committee members, presidential candidates, running mates, G-100 members, and members of the minority caucus in the House of Representatives are expected to participate. Before we go into the full details, please endeavor to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what is coming next. Now, back to the news. According to the G-100 convener, Salihu Lukman, this meeting is deliberately not starting with the question everybody is already asking: who will be the presidential candidate? And I think that is probably the correct place to start. Because if Atiku, Obi, and these opposition parties enter that hall, and the first argument becomes who should surrender his presidential ambition to whom, this entire project could collapse before it even begins. The G-100 is saying something different. Their question is, what are you collectively prepared to do for Nigeria? Before talking about one candidate, establish the rules. Establish the structure. Establish what cooperation actually means. Establish how disagreements will be settled. Establish what happens if eventually one candidate is chosen. Establish how the parties protect their individual identities. That is far more serious than simply shouting opposition coalition. And there is another important part of this proposal. The G-100 says cooperation does not require any political party to disappear into another. That matters because this has always been one of the biggest problems with Nigerian political alliances. Every party wants cooperation, but nobody wants to lose control of their structure. Every politician wants unity, provided everybody unites behind him. That is where the trouble normally starts. So the summit is proposing 5 specialized working groups. If the parties approve them, those groups will have 4 weeks to develop the major documents and agreements required to give this cooperation an institutional structure. Now we are talking. Because Nigerian politics has had enough meetings where politicians enter one room, smile for cameras, and announce that discussions were fruitful. What exactly was agreed? Who is responsible for implementing it? What happens next? What is the deadline? This proposal at least gives them 4 weeks and specific working structures. But the real test will be what happens when those committees begin touching the difficult questions. Because eventually, whether anybody likes it or not, presidential candidacy will enter the room. Atiku is already the ADC presidential candidate. Peter Obi is already the NDC presidential candidate. These are 2 major opposition figures with serious ambitions and established political bases. So how exactly will cooperation work? Will everybody retain their presidential candidates and cooperate only on election protection, legislative races, and democratic institutions? Will there eventually be one consensus presidential candidate? Will there be some form of electoral agreement? Will one candidate withdraw? Will they coordinate agents and election monitoring? Will they share intelligence about electoral irregularities? Will they establish common principles on security, the economy, and electoral reform? Those are the difficult conversations that will determine whether this summit becomes history or another political photograph. And Nigerians should watch very carefully, because opposition unity sounds beautiful until sacrifice enters the conversation. It is very easy for Atiku supporters to demand unity if their definition of unity is everybody supporting Atiku. It is equally easy for Obi supporters to demand unity if their definition is everybody supporting Obi. That is not compromise. Compromise begins when everybody understands that they may not get everything they want. And this is where I want to hear what Nigerians themselves think. If these 6 parties eventually decide that defeating the APC requires one opposition presidential candidate, what should determine that candidate? Previous election performance, national spread, experience, public popularity, internal primaries, opinion polling, or some completely different method? Because simply asking one person to step down without a transparent process could create another crisis. And let me also say this clearly. Opposition unity by itself is not a program for government. You cannot simply tell Nigerians, vote for us because we are not APC. That is not enough. What will you do differently? How will you reduce food prices? How will you address insecurity? What is your electricity plan? What is your position on petrol subsidy? What will you do about the naira? How will you reduce waste in government? How will you handle corruption? What happens to education and healthcare? What will you do differently within your first 100 days? Those questions must eventually become part of this cooperation. The G-100 says it is only facilitating and observing this process. It is not replacing the constitutional authority of the participating political parties. That is also important. The final decisions belong to the parties themselves. And remember that this summit did not suddenly appear from nowhere. The G-100 published what it called the Doctrine of a Necessary Democratic Opposition on August 2nd and has spent weeks consulting the 6 participating parties. According to the group, those discussions have already produced a shared briefing document identifying areas where these parties agree while recognizing that they have different histories and political interests. So Monday should move this conversation from consultation into actual structure. But Nigerians should not celebrate yet. Wait for the outcome. We have watched political coalitions collapse before. We have watched politicians premise cooperation and begin fighting immediately. Positions are discussed. So let us see whether these people can actually place something above personal ambition. And the ruling APC should also pay attention. A fragmented opposition is obviously easier for an incumbent government to defeat than a coordinated one. If Atiku is fighting Obi, Obi is fighting Atiku. Smaller opposition parties are fighting both of them, and everybody is deploying resources separately. APC benefits. But if these parties develop a serious framework for cooperation, the political mathematics begins to change. That doesn't automatically mean APC loses. Absolutely not. APC still has to be defeated at the ballot box. Opposition parties still need organization, credible candidates, agents, funding, mobilization, and a message Nigerians believe. A coalition does not automatically create votes. An APC has its own nationwide political structure. So nobody should start announcing election results because Atiku and Obi entered the same building. Now, while all of this is happening, another serious political fight has erupted over President Tinubu's newly announced $1 billion social protection program. The ADC is calling this a panic reaction to Atiku Abubakar's proposal for targeted production subsidies. And the timing is what has triggered the controversy. ADC's argument is basically this: Nigerians have been complaining about economic hardship for roughly 3 years. Food prices have risen, transportation has become expensive, purchasing power has fallen. According to the party, the government repeatedly defended its economic reforms despite that hardship. But now that another election is approaching and Atiku is aggressively campaigning on targeted subsidy and restoring purchasing power, suddenly there is a $1 billion social protection program. ADC is therefore asking a very uncomfortable question. Why now? That question deserves an answer. But I am also not going to automatically accept ADC's conclusion that because the program is coming before an election, it must therefore be a reaction to Atiku. That has to be demonstrated. Government has a responsibility to provide social protection regardless of who proposes what. The more important questions are where the money is coming from, who gets it, who controls it, how beneficiaries are selected, and whether Nigerians can independently verify everything. That is where this becomes serious. ADC is specifically questioning the source of the $1 billion. The party also brought up previous social interventions, saying the Humanitarian Affairs Minister claimed more than N600 billion had been dispersed in cash transfers over 3 years to slightly more than 10 million households. ADC wants evidence. Who received this money? Where are the beneficiaries? What measurable impact did it have? Can independent auditors verify those numbers? Those are legitimate accountability questions. If government says billions have been distributed to millions of Nigerians, there should be a transparent system capable of proving it without exposing people's private information. Because this is public money, government should not become offended when citizens ask for receipts. And then there is the proposed N40,000 shock response payment to families. ADC says this raises concerns about possible vote buying. Now, I would be careful about declaring it vote buying simply because ADC says so. Providing assistance before an election is not automatically vote buying. But the timing makes transparency absolutely necessary. Who qualifies for the N40,000? Who creates the list? What database is being used? Can politicians add names? Will beneficiaries be selected according to need or political connections? Can opposition parties scrutinize the process? Can civil society monitor it? Will the complete expenditure be audited? Those are the questions that separate genuine social protection from political patronage. And there is another issue ADC raised that I think the federal government needs to explain properly. What exactly is the role of First Lady Remi Tinubu in this program? The ADC is asking why the First Lady is launching a federal government social intervention program involving $1 billion in public funds. Again, that is a legitimate institutional question. The wife of a president can absolutely support humanitarian programs. She can advocate for vulnerable Nigerians. She can run initiatives. But the office of the First Lady is not the same thing as an elected ministry with independent constitutional control over federal funds. So if this is genuinely a federal government program, tell Nigerians which ministry or agency owns it, which budget line funds it, who approved it, who controls disbursement, who signs the accounts, who appears before the National Assembly, who answers the Auditor General, and what statutory authority, if any, does the office of the First Lady exercise over those funds. These are not attacks on Remi Tinubu personally. These are questions about public finance if $1 billion of public resources is involved, Nigerians deserve very clear answers. And this is exactly where I have a problem with the way government sometimes respond to criticism in Nigeria. Instead of simply publishing the documents and explaining the process, everything becomes politics. ADC asks questions. Government says opposition. Atiku proposes something. Presidency says desperation. Government announces something. Opposition says vote buying. Meanwhile, ordinary Nigerians are asking one basic question. Will my life actually improve? That is what matters. ADC says palliatives cannot replace policies that restore purchasing power and increase production. On that point, there is a serious economic argument to consider. Giving somebody 40,000 naira may help that family temporarily. But what happens when that 40,000 naira finishes? If food remains expensive, transportation remains expensive, electricity remains expensive, and wages remain weak, that person returns to the same problem. Social protection has a place. There are vulnerable people who genuinely need direct support. But social protection cannot become the entire economic strategy. Nigeria needs production, jobs, affordable energy, agriculture, security for farmers, better transportation, stable businesses, and wages with real purchasing power. Atiku is trying to make exactly that argument with his targeted subsidy proposal. But Atiku himself must provide the numbers. It is not enough to say, I will restore relief. How much? Who qualifies? How long does it last? What prevents corruption? What prevents smuggling? What prevents another subsidy racket? How will it be financed? Those questions are not attacks on Atiku. If he wants to become president, he must answer them. And Tinubu's government must face the same standard. If this $1 billion program is genuine, publish the structure. If it is properly funded, show the funding. If there is a reliable social register, explain how it was built. If the First Lady is merely launching it ceremonially, say that clearly and identify the government institution legally responsible for the money. If N600 billion has already reached more than 10 million households, show Nigerians enough verifiable evidence to establish that the program actually worked. Transparency can end much of this argument. And there is a political connection between these two stories that Nigerians should not miss. The battle for 2027 is moving away from slogans. Atiku and Obi are preparing to sit with other opposition parties in Abuja to discuss cooperation. Atiku is campaigning heavily on economic relief and subsidy. ADC is attacking Tinubu's social protection program. Tinubu's government is defending its economic direction. Everything is beginning to converge around one question. Who can convince Nigerians that life will actually become better under their leadership? That is the real 2027 battle. Not posters, not rallies, not politicians insulting each other. Living standards, security, trust, and competence. So Monday's G-100 summit will be worth watching very closely. If Atiku, Obi, and the other opposition leaders enter that hall genuinely prepared to negotiate, establish transparent rules, and make difficult compromises, this could reshape the opposition ahead of 2027. But if everybody enters secretly, calculating only how the arrangement can make him president, Nigerians will discover that very quickly. And on this $1 billion program, the government should answer the questions instead of treating scrutiny as hostility. Where is the money coming from? Who controls it? Who gets it? How are they selected? What exactly is the First Lady's role? What happened to the previous hundreds of billions reportedly spent? And what mechanism prevents this program from becoming another political distribution network before an election? those answers matter. Because whether the money comes through Tinubu's social protection program or Atiku's proposed targeted subsidy, it is ultimately Nigerians who will pay for government policy and Nigerians who must live with the consequences. And 2027 should be the election where Nigerians stop accepting beautiful promises without demanding the mathematics behind them.